Welcome back. There's an interesting conversation that was going on during the break, but I'm sure the gentleman here would never want to mention it on air. But let's now focus on something that came up from Parliament last week. It is in regards to the KEMSA PSA report. But before we look at the findings, I just want to remind you where we have come from in terms of the timelines since this probe began. Do you have that? And of course, we know from history that the KEMSA procurement scandal, there were some recommendations by Public Investments Committee. Well, we need to look at something different, talking about the timelines in as far as where it began. As we try to get that on, we know that there has been also reactions from the chairman, the former chairman of KEMSA, that is Kembe Gitura, saying that that report did not put into consideration his views that he presented through some evidence in form of affidavits. So let's look at these timelines. That on the 30th of September 2020, the Auditor General presented a special audit report to Parliament. The auditor faulted KEMSA, that KEMSA was found to have flouted procurement laws, and there was no money, no value for money had been realized from procurement, going to more than 7 billion shillings. Something else that we know is that the Auditor General found that 97% of supplies were still in the warehouse. This is by September. And the supplies were procured at a cost of 7.6 billion shillings, of which 4.7 billion shillings had already been paid for. And so on the 26th of August, that is last year, after a special report on COVID millionaires, the President gave an order that probe be concluded within 21 days. And then on the 18th of September last year, the EACC sent files to the Director of Public Prosecutions, and the DPP appointed a team to review the KEMSA files from EACC. And some 2 weeks later, that is on the 2nd of October 2020, the DPP returned the files to EACC for further investigations. A team of DPP and EACC officials were to sit down and look at how to seal those loopholes. Then parliamentary investigations. There has been investigations by the Senate Health Committee, the National Assembly Health Committee, and the National Assembly Public Investments Committee, all of which now have given their report. And some of the flagged entities were Shop and Buy Limited, Kilig Limited, Nanopay Limited. And this is what the DPP said on 2nd of October, that an order to fast-track the process, and in the spirit of teamwork, the prosecution team has been instructed to hold joint meetings with the EACC investigators so as to adequately address the identified gaps on sufficiency of evidence in accordance with the Constitution and other laws. We've tried to reach the EACC for the latest. We've not been able to, but there were some recommendations. This is what was sent to DPP. Prosecute 6 senior officials of KEMSA and investigate the suspect payments and the beneficiaries who received them. So we tried to reach the EACC for feedback on whether that file that came from the DPP was received and the processing of that, and whether it has been sent back to the DPP. We still don't have a response. But now the PIC has come up with similar recommendations. And let me begin with you, Dr. Eden Kenan, because you once sat at the PIC as chair in the last parliament. And when you look at first these timelines, the process that has been followed so far, now the recommendations are stuck between the DPP's office and the EACC. Nobody has been charged. Never mind, the President gave 21 days. Now it's more than a year. What comes to mind as you reflect on this KEMSA situation?
Again, we need to appreciate the functioning of the current constitution. Luckily, I was privileged to have been a member of the Audit Commission the one time. I've also served as the chair of a Public Investment Committee. And equally, I've also been in Parliament for quite some time. But I think we need to look at the law first. Article 117 provides for powers and privileges of parliamentary committees. Article 118 provides for public participation in terms of what the committees are supposed to do in soliciting for evidence. And Article 124 provides for the modus operandi of the committee system. And Article 125 gives the committees the same powers as the High Court. This is one thing that many Kenyans actually did not know. Though this is not captured in the Judiciary Act, that brings in the mandate of PIC and other committees. Somebody may ask, there are duplications. Yes, but the Senate committee have different mandate, though they may be dealing with the same subject matter. PIC and PAC are the few known historical investigative committees. So in my opinion, what PIC has done is within the purview of the law, within the mandate of that particular committee, and more so picking on a special audit report by the Auditor General. That's actually what the study notes actually provides for. So in terms of the evidential value and the recommendations made by PIC is prudent and excellent. I've gone through the report. I think they have done their best. They have looked at this. It is now up to the other investigating agencies because PIC or Parliament does not have the prosecutorial powers.
Right.
They have done the investigation. Now the ball is with ECC and the DPP to walk the talk. Now going back to the presidential directive, I think we also need to understand where the president actually was coming from. We have different sources of law. We have the Constitution, we have the Acts of Parliament, we have traditions or what I can call historical court decisions. Where there is a lacuna in the law, presidential directive can also constitute one of the sources of law. So the president made a recommendation, a directive to his technocrat, and I'm sure that is what prompted these other agencies, though ideally they should not wait for presidential directive to undertake some of these recommendations. All that now has been done. We may need to have met the timeline, but I think I have not seen anybody ever saying what the Committee of Parliament has done is correct. It's like once a court makes a decision, very few people actually accept the verdict of the court. So in my opinion, the committee has done its work. Okay. They have met the public expectation. What they have done is within their mandate. It's now up to, and I'm sure one of their recommendations actually includes EACC or the other government investigative agencies to pursue this and bring the individuals who are culpable to court and charge them in accordance with our penal code. But there's something that really many people again are not seeing this. You see, the role of Parliament, and in particular the role of PIC, as an investigative committee, does not in any way prevent EACC and other governmental agencies in also pursuing their own independent investigation. Right. So this gives them more evidence, more evidential value from that. If you look at that particular report, the report is loaded, it's full of facts. Some individuals may disagree, others may agree, but it's full of facts. That report alone actually is enough to charge individuals and take them to court. As to what the court will do is up to the court.
All right. I want us to listen to what the former chair of KEMSA, he's currently the chairperson of the Communications Authority Board, that is Kembi Gitura. He sort of disagrees with the report, and here's what he says.
One observation or recommendation against me, personally, in the whole of that report. It says that I should be investigated for having influenced the tender to a company called Wallabies Ventures Limited for them to get a tender from KEMSA. And it is on this allegation that the committee recommended that I be charged, and then they added with a view to being charged, for breach of the Public Officers Ethics Act. It's a ridiculous recommendation because on 19th of April this year, I received a letter from the Clerk of the National Assembly, and that letter required me to swear an affidavit on allegations that had been made against me, stating that I had influenced the tender award to Wallabies Ventures Limited. I did immediately. On 21st of April, I saw an affidavit in which I stated that I have never met any director of Wallabies. I do not know Wallabies Limited. I do not know any of its directors. And I did not influence any tender, not just to Wallabies Limited, but to any of the companies that supplied KEMSA with COVID-19 items. I made that very clear.
And so he feels that his evidence was not considered. Because, Dr. Omalo, you have sat in the Public Investment Committee under the chairmanship of Dr. Kenan here. How exactly do you, because so much evidence will come before you or came before you, how do you make your decisions, especially when you have to consider all the facts and all the evidence adduced before you, including like what Senator Gitura is talking about?
Yes, it is true. I've served in the PIC committee. And before I comment on that, it is very wrong for the chair, the allegations he has made, because I'm not sure whether he has gone through the thorough report. Because Parliament cannot just make any recommendation from nowhere. There is evidence that has been given before the committee, observations have been made, and there's that logical flow. And many times when you call the witnesses, at times you call them back to substantiate after hearing from other people who have presented their evidence. So to me, first and foremost, if the board of KEMSA was kicked out because of whatever happened, my question is, how did even Kempi Gitura become the chair of the Communication Authority? I don't want to go there, because to me, if a chair has been sent away because of issues during the integrity, and he finds himself being appointed again the chair of another parastatal, transferring a problem from one to another, it is not good. And Kempi Gitura himself being a lawyer, he understands very well that there's no way a parliament, and having been in parliament and a deputy speaker, he knows very well that under our standing orders, there's no way you can make any allegation or anything in the report without any evidence. So for purposes of PIC... The
specific recommendation, Dr. Omalo, is on the screen, that EACC to investigate alleged interference of Senator Kempi Gitura and Joel Gesuka Onsare with a view to prefer charges against them for violating Public Officers and Ethics Act. So it is to investigate. There's no finding that really... I don't know what that language is. Does it say that...
I was still explaining.
They appear to be guilty of something, or investigation to be conducted?
For the committee to have come up with such a recommendation, it must have come from the observation based on the evidence that the other witnesses were called. So in this case, or in this context, I'm very sure PIC committee should have gotten some maybe evidence from the people on the board. Remember, the director of procurement was also called. He gave evidence. The directors of this particular company were also called. The CEO was also called. So for them to have come up with such a recommendation, there must be a logical flow in terms of the observations that were made. They cannot come up with just any wild recommendation. It must be based on what evidence was given. So again, under Article 125 of the Constitution, which is very clear, that people need to know, that the parliamentary committees have powers like that of the High Court. They can actually summon you in case you fail. So based on that Article 125, because it becomes like a quasi-judicial committee, so we know very well that it might not have the prosecutory powers the way Honorable Kenana said. So PIC was in order to have given that particular recommendation. So it does not mean that whatever Kempi Gitura had given before the parliamentary committee should have been followed. No. Maybe after the observations, it was insignificant. And that is why, the PIC from its own observations realized that there must be some linkage, that this person, Kempi Gitura, him having been the chair of the board. And let me say this, allow me to say this, because you really covered a lot of PIC. Under the procurement law, there are three main ways of tendering. We have the open tendering, we have the restricted tendering, and we have the direct tendering. And in this context, because COVID was an emergency, and they went for direct tendering as per the procurement law, but that did not mean they circumvent the law. If you can use, they must do due diligence. A company for 2 weeks or 2 months, and you give it billions of tender.
Of course, there are many recommendations, not just on Senator Kempi Gitura, who spoke to Citizen TV, just hold on, yesterday, but there are other recommendations, including the investigation and prosecution of, for instance, the former CEO, John Omanjari, Another of issues, but Senator Kembi Gitura feels that Parliament needs to find a better way of conducting investigations because, like I told you, the Senate Health Committee, the National Assembly Health Committee, and the Public Investments Committee of the National Assembly, all of them have been calling all these people to come and conduct, to be interviewed. Of course, Dr. Kenan here says that PIC and PSC are unique in that aspect, but listen to what Senator Gitura says.
Sometimes you wonder, and I said I've been in Parliament, yeah? The Health Committee did its own investigations. Now, the PIC has done its own investigations. They have filed different reports in the same Parliament, sometimes with different recommendations. Because even the Senate itself did its own report and again filed its own recommendation. And that is why sometimes, by way of trying to save public finances, you have joint committees. If you're investigating the same Auditor General's report, for instance, you are the same Parliament, against the same institution, in this case KEMSA, why do you want to have 19 people and another 19 people and another 19 people doing the same parallel investigations when they can have one joint committee doing the investigations and come out with one joint report? If nothing else, to have coherence in the outcome, also to have a report that is not different from the other one, because the Senate report is quite different actually from the PIC report in its recommendations. And I think it would make sense if sometimes thinking about the public also, and the people you are investigating, the people you are calling to give evidence, because if you are called by 3 different committees to come and give evidence on the same issue, you can imagine the amount of time, man hours and everything else that is lost, the amount of money that is lost. So maybe there is reason to want to think about why can't we have joint committees? And I remember when I was in Senate, we used to have substantially joint committees where the issues were the same, so that you have a coherence of the outcome. Yeah.
All right, and Honorable Opiyo Wandayi, you're the chair of the Public Accounts Committee, and sometimes you'll have issues that you need to investigate. But on that recommendation or observation by Senator Gitura there, how do you reconcile it? Because there could be a departmental committee, but there's also a PSC that may want to probe. Would it be better, like he says, for all these committees to come together and conduct a joint investigation?
Well, you know, Sam, there's nothing really wrong with having joint committees from time to time dealing with specific issues. That is really best practice, the world over. Mm-hmm. But I need to jog the memory of Senator Kembi Gitura and others on the mandates of these committees he's talking about. First and foremost, Senator, I don't think deals with national government functions, okay? Senate is concerned with the counties. Mm-hmm. So I'm not quite conversant with the mandate of the Senate Committee on Health. I may be wrong. Mm-hmm. But I am sure that I know that the mandate of the Health Committee, which is the committee concerned with health function mm-hmm. at the national government level, is quite elaborate. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, the Kenyans must understand the background of this PIC report. Okay? Mm-hmm. Public Investment Committee and the Public Accounts Committee of the National Assembly only deal with reports emanating from the Auditor Generals. And that is why we'll remember, or we'll recall, mm-hmm. that immediately the issue of KEMSA erupted. Whereas the Health Committee could pick it up and run with it. Both PIC and the PAC, which I chair, mm-hmm. could not. And indeed, procedurally, we did direct. Personally, in my committee, we directed the Auditor General to undertake a special audit on these COVID-19 funds mm-hmm. with regard to the national government functions. PIC did the same, but with regard to KEMSA, because you must understand that PIC deals with parastatals.
Okay.
Yes. PAC deals with ministries, state departments, commissions, and therefore the Auditor General procedurally undertook special audit on the COVID-19 funds and produced 2 reports. One concerned with KEMSA, which PIC has dealt with now, and one concerned with the general national government ministries of National Treasury, Ministry of Health, and all other national government functions, which we are going to deal with as PAC. Senator Gitura must understand that we are not yet done with this as Parliament, by the way. The Public Accounts Committee is yet to embark on examining the special audit report on COVID-19 with regard to the Ministry of Health and the National Treasury, because there were funds which came from other donors outside the country that went to the National Treasury.
And therefore, wouldn't it be better for these parliamentary committees to just think about these things and handle them together? So that, because we are almost to the end of the term.
It is what I'm saying, Sam, if you just listen to me. Because of the different mandates of these committees, sometimes it's difficult to have a joint committee. Okay? For instance, PAC, which I chair, cannot deal with KEMSA issues. Should not deal with KEMSA issues. But we deal with issues to do with the health ministry, which oversights KEMSA. And we deal with the issues to do with National Treasury. Yes.
Right.
So and therefore, what has come out is just the tip of the iceberg. I must caution Kenyans. What has come out through the PIC report, which I haven't read, by the way, is only the tip of the iceberg, because it's only dealing with the KEMSA aspect of COVID-19 looting. PAC is going to deal with this looting from the very top. Yes, so Kenyans must be patient. Secondly, and finally, I've seen the clamor for KEMSA culprits to be taken to court. Firstly, parliamentary committees do not determine criminal capability of any individual. That is the mandate of investigating agencies. And even them, once the EACC or the DCI complete investigations, even where they recommend to the DPP to prosecute, the DPP must undertake 2 tests legally under the criminal justice system. Firstly, is the evidential test. There is evidence enough to sustain prosecution. But even where the evidence is enough, you must also undertake a public interest test. Is it in public interest? Because not all cases which have got enough evidence are taken to court, by the way. Yes, but on this one, I agree with you that there is immense public interest that KEMSA or COVID-19 looters be taken to court. But that has been on the basis of credible evidence that can sustain prosecution and possibly lead to conviction. Yes.
And Dr. Kenan, because I remember covering you elaborately on the youth fund scandal. I think they had lost about 180 million shillings in the previous term. And there was public outcry that led to the extent of sacking of then chairperson, the late Bruce Odhiambo. Of course, the late Catherine Namuye had already been suspended. Eventually, they were taken to court, but they passed on before the conclusion of those cases. But on here to reflect on the role of Parliament in all these probes, where do you find it? Because Parliament is responsible for its entire tenure. After this term comes to an end and the recommendations by PIC will not have been implemented, what then happens?
I think, first of all, we say ignorance.
Yes.
It's no defense. Parliament is a quasi-judicial institution. And I entirely agree with Chairman Wandai that committees have different jurisdictions. What PAC and PIC can do cannot be done by the Health Committee. The Health Committee has every mandate even to look at the legislative, the institutional mandate and this. PIC can only look at the audit issues.
Okay.
But I think there's something that we need even as a Parliament. Parliament, first of all, is a house of traditions. It's answering your question straight. And therefore, there's continuity. So where if a committee makes a report and Parliament goes synodai and there's next Parliament, that report is the property of the House. There's continuation. So the report does not die with that committee. The subsequent committee can
what mechanism is used to ensure that the recommendations you made for Youth Fund are monitored to the logical conclusion.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. What happens, and I think I wanted to comment on something about the report writing. What happens is, once a committee makes a report, the committee acts as an extension of the House. The chair enjoys the same powers and privileges as the speaker. Once the committee makes a report and the report is tabled, and the report is adopted, is debated and adopted by the House, that report becomes part and parcel of the archive of the House. And then there's a unique committee called Implementation Committee, which picks up the report that has just been passed. It is the mandate of that committee now. It moves now from the committee that has prepared to the Implementation Committee. The work of the Implementation Committee now is to deal with all agencies and ensure that the recommendations of Parliament are applied and implemented. And I think this was in the wisdom of, we introduced it actually in the last Parliament, to have the Implementation Committee. But there's something Senator Kembi Kitura has said, which I think somehow I agree. In terms of report writing, when a committee picks an issue, you collect information, you collect the same information, you synthesize, analyze, and come up with a report that is now ready for dissemination. That dissemination now comes through Parliament. But I think there's something that I told my colleagues, and I think this is something that we have trained actually on our clerks. My recommendation, and I think this is now in line with best practices in some of these major democracies, is for committees to prepare a charge sheet of facts and send the same charges to the prosecuting agencies. Now that will make the work very easy. It's like, for example, in the issue of Kembi Kitura, instead of making that sweeping investigate further, what the committee should have done is, based on the evidence, they should have prepared a charge sheet based on the penal code or the particular act, whether it's an EEC act on this, and say, as far as we are concerned, there are the following allegations against this. They remain allegations until the person is either convicted or released in court. So that will have informed, and it's one better way, and I'm sure it's coming. So my take on that is, Kemba Kitura will not have been talking about further investigation on this if you had a charge sheet, and that is what we have done with the Youth Fund. That is what we have done with a number of other agencies that we investigated. That removes the element of doubt that, to the best of the committee, to the best of the committee's report, there's this charge sheet against you. It's now up to the DPP or EACC to either amend, delete, or completely even do away with it. Okay. That is one major departure from the way the committees actually used to, so that you don't just make a sweeping statement. But I think as far as the facts are concerned, Kembi Kitura has every right to dismiss the allegations. Nobody, if I were in his position, will do the same. But equally, this is a major, actually, PIC, and PAC are key committees, and their reports are almost binding. All right. So I think what Kembi Kitura should be doing right now is to discount, if the evidential value, if there's evidence, is by now to say, this clause is not right, provide the evidence. This other clause is not correct, provide the evidence. But you cannot dismiss the report of an entire committee. And equally, Senate is one of the two houses. How the committees of the Senate actually operate is completely different from how the committees of the National actually operate. So I think, as a former parliamentarian, I thought you will also understand this, but I think it is wrong. It is wrong, in the name of other justifications, to dismiss that report of PIC is watertight, it's credible, it's full of evidence, and I think it's up to now the DPP and DCI to implement the recommendation of that particular report.
Dr. Amalwa, part of the conversation with Senator Kembi Kitura, he says that this report is coming at a time that the EACC has already concluded investigations, actually sent the report to DPP. DPP returned it for tightening of the evidence. A year later, we still don't know the fate of that. So one would wonder, even if PIC is to make these recommendations, the DPP's office is independent. So how does that sit? Because Kenyans, at the end of the day, are looking at who took away our money and how are they going to be made to pay. In the end, has Parliament facilitated that satisfaction for Kenyans?
Thank you. First and foremost, I want to say that when you look at the parliamentary reports, the independent commissions are not obligated, that they are being directed. Because one of the recommendations we've seen, PIC is saying they are recommending for further investigations, particularly on the case of Kembi Kitura. And Kembi Kitura, he should not be defensive. Let him wait to be given an opportunity. If he's called, then he can defend himself in the court of law. That's how it is. But when you come on national TV...
No, it's okay. I think that point has been...
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just re-emphasizing.
Right.
So when it comes to the issues of the PIC recommendations, again, and you want to borrow from the jurisdiction of the United States of America, where I happen to have gone with Honorable Kainan, most of these recommendations, 90% are actually implemented. They look into it. And as
Germany 100%.
Germany is 100%. So whatever Parliament has gone through and has looked at the observations and has come up with an objective conclusion, then the executive should be able to see how it can be implemented. Now, when you look at the reports, I want to go back to the reports because he said that the recommendations are totally different. What Kembi Kitura said. I've looked at some of the recommendations. There is a convergency. And one committee might have looked at a matter deeper.
Okay.
So in this context, if DPP will be able to look at maybe the reports of PIC and see there is evidence that is attaching on Kembi Kitura, then Kembi Kitura should be ready to defend himself. And Parliament will discuss about the issue of standing orders that we amend in future, these oversight committees, so that we can also be able to have officers seconded from the DPP side and DCI. I think it's work in progress. I think Honorable Kainan, you remember that. That instead of having duplication, as he clearly mentioned here, we can have a collaboration with the DCI and maybe the DPP, so that they can send their officers to come to sit in those parliamentary committees. And by the way, when Parliament sits, people think we don't have the technical expertise. We have technical expertise in Parliament on matters of legal, matters of audits, matters of economics, and all that. So whatever the recommendations that they have put, I have no doubt, there is that professional input that has been put there.
And Dr. Chris Omalo, I'm asking that because if you recall, once upon a time there was a report on NYS1 scandal, and there were several recommendations, including against CS Devolution, then now Governor Anne Waiguru, that she should be further investigated with a view to being barred from ever holding a public office. That didn't necessarily happen. So eventually at implementation, probably more facts are realized. But the Kenyan is still wondering the question that you've still not answered. How then does Parliament facilitate Kenyans getting back their right?
Now, under Article, I think 226 of the Constitution, it says that any public officer, whether you're in office or out of office, and maybe you've been involved in the loss of public funds, that particular person must be surcharged. And when it comes to Parliament on the issue of Anne Waiguru, that recommendation that Parliament had made, it should have been fine-tuned because we have a body that is in charge of matters of integrity, and this is ESCC. So ESCC, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, looks at the recommendations of maybe the PIC report at that particular time and investigate further. Because ESCC on matters of Chapter 6, actually as per the law, it is the one that is in charge. So it's the responsibility of the ESCC to bar somebody. Parliament has just done a recommendation.
I think there's something Parliament can also do. Maybe Parliament has the inherent institutional mechanism to debar an entity that has been involved in corrupt practices. Equally, Parliament can also sanction an individual not to hold a public office, and that is binding through a committee report. So if the other government agencies have not acted on a particular report and Parliament finds that there is a lack of maybe political...
But if you go to the court of law and you are found not to have been guilty...
I think what the court will do is their own. The court can disagree, but Parliament has a right.
But is it enforceable? I mean...
Yes, it's enforceable. It's one of the decisions of the House. If it's the decision of the House and the House approves, it is...
Is it really enforceable? Because,
I think it is subject to debate because the Constitution is also clear, says you are innocent until proven guilty and you've exhausted all your appeal mechanisms. So to me, Parliament can recommend. And there's the court...
Just hold on. There's a tweet I want us to look at by Okello Mwalimu. I wish it was here so that I could... So he's saying that the major setbacks in the fight against graft include the phrase presumption of innocence until proven guilty, duplication of roles and supremacy battles among anti-graft bodies, selective administration of justice, and poor choices at the ballot. And Opio Wandai, allow me to get to Wandai because it's been pretty quiet here as we exit from this topic. And of course you look at that, and Kenyans are struggling with that however grave the findings of Parliament would be on a public official or a civil servant, they still have a right to go ahead with their lives because innocent till proven guilty. So in the end, do you think Parliament is able to to play its role given the legal regime we have in the country, or the justice regime we have in the country?
You know, Sam, you must look at Parliament from the perspective of its oversight duty. Mm-hmm. When these committees of Parliament, especially those of the National Assembly, are undertaking their duty of investigations and so on and so forth, they are basically trying to contribute to accountability in the management of public affairs by people who have been entrusted with such responsibilities. And therefore, you must understand that the mere fact that a House committee can invite individuals and in the public glare before television cameras interrogate them, okay?
That alone.
That is a huge contribution to matter of accountability. Because you will also notice that both the ECC and DCI will never interrogate people in public. That is one. And even if they were to do it, I don't think they will delve into the matters that Parliament will delve into. Okay? So Parliament is able to get out issues that would not let come out. And that is a very, very key contribution. And I have said also that whether the matter finally ends up in court is neither here nor there. And again, you must also realize that there is no time limitation. There is no time limit insofar as criminal matters are concerned. They remain live until the world will come to an end. Okay? And therefore, we cannot push the DPP to just take people to court for purposes of statistics.
Evidence.
He must be satisfied that if he takes people to court, he can sustain the prosecution. Okay? That is very, very important. And therefore, Parliament is playing a serious complementary duty to those other agencies that are enhancing accountability in the country.
Okay.
Yes.
And I want us to switch to another